Thank you, Mr. Bajaz, for this brief introduction. And let me set the context for today's discussion. I also take pleasure on behalf of the India Energy Forum in welcoming all our distinguished speakers and participants, particularly our distinguished speakers from abroad, Mr. Azad, who I worked with him when he was Power Secretary way back in 2009 and beyond. He became the principal secretary to the Prime Minister, and now he is also the president of the Bangladesh Energy Society, like we have India Energy Forum. We have Mr. Garg from IPAN. He is the vice president. Recently, he did a great program. IPAN did a great program. I have the honor of speaking there. We will be also joined by Mr. Rinjin, who is the managing director of Clean of Bhutan. And we have our old eminent speakers from India. And our participants, I welcome you once again. The idea of this discussion was that we have been already trading power. Earlier, we were trading in a very, I will not say informal way, but it was happening, a discussion between the governments, and its levels have increased in last 10 years, starting from, let's say, when we connected Bangladesh on the HVDC system. And then we have now the large interconnection with Nepal. We are going to have more interconnections. So obviously, this trade has to increase. Government of India also issued guidelines, as you all know, and it allows going beyond bilateral. It can happen that Nepal power can go to Bangladesh or to Sri Lanka, or Bhutan power can go to Bangladesh and Sri Lanka in times to come. So we have to now, already some structure exists, coordination exists, structure exists, and things have been moving on very smoothly. In the context of climate change and in the context of all these countries, all of us, trying to have realign our energy policy, realign our energy initiatives towards net zero over several decades. Somebody says 2050, 2060, 2070. But the fact is that we have to enhance the role of renewables, and proportion of the fossil fuel will reduce. In that process, this cross-border power cooperation has assumed special significance. It always had advantage, but it has assumed a special significance. Bangladesh, Nepal has huge potential of hydropower. Bhutan has huge potential of hydropower. Sri Lanka has potential of solar. We have potentials of different types, but mainly coal. And therefore, in the context of energy transition that is being considered all over the world, not only in South Asia, but South Asia in particular, because South Asia also happens to be highly fossil fuel-centric power supply system. This cooperation and cross-border power sale purchase assumes much greater relevance. It always had relevance to solve the problem of each other, like we did try to do something for Bangladesh. Nepal is doing export and import both. Bhutan, we have been importing power, also exporting to them in winter season. But now, in the coming decades, this has assumed much greater relevance. And therefore, what would be the vision of market structure in South Asia? That is very important to consider. Informal, semi-formal, and totally formalized way, so that the structure and the processes do not stand in the way of attaining the objective. Objective is cooperation leading to a more balanced way of energy transition, leading to climate change concerns being addressed. So that is the idea. At several forums, this is being discussed. We also are discussing in the Power Secretary's Roundtable. We are discussing in RIS. Through World Bank, I am involved in some of these processes. Through Champion process, we have our India Energy Forum has taken up this agenda. Several organizations, USAID is also trying to help us in several ways. How do we structure this? How do we foresee the structure? And how do we go towards implementing the structure is important. One very good thing is that India had similar problem 2 decades ago. India had a state grid earlier. I mean, every state had its own grid, its own frequency. When NTPC as a power generator came on the scene, we had regional grid. The group of states, we had 5 regional grids. Each regional grid had its own frequency. In some part of the country, particularly Eastern India, we had surplus power because our transmission system was weak. And South, we had deficit. So South frequency will be very poor and frequency will be very high, unmanageable on the higher side in East. So therefore, we went in a big way, very big way to have national grid and then also the processes. So we had a vision on what we should do in India, all these 29, 30 states and union territories. How do we have our market structure vision in place? And that's not complete. It's going on. It's a process which is dynamic, it is increasing. You might have seen how our regulatory commission brings out several products. India Energy Exchange and power exchanges are helping us in day-ahead market, term-ahead market. And we never believed a few years ago that power will be traded on 15 minutes basis, at different rates, different sellers, different buyers. So the market is developing. So it's maturing. It is not matured yet. But then, why I'm saying this point, that what we are trying to do for whole of South Asia, more or less, though the country was same, but more or less the problems were similar. Challenges were similar. Challenge of interconnection, challenge of process, challenge of coordination, challenge of regulation, regulators having their own coordination, different load dispatch centers of the state and of the region having their own need for coordination with national load dispatch centers. So there is a reference point. We also have experience of what has happened in some of the other parts of the world. Quite often that point comes that do we have some reference elsewhere? So we are also searching for examples which could be relevant in our South Asian context, so that when we discuss and foresee, though this will never be cast in iron and stone, as I said, it will have to be a dynamic process. And as we go along, as the situations emerge, as the imbalances emerge in terms of the nature of power supply, this deficit and surplus supply in different parts of the region, the process will have to followed accordingly. You can see we did a guideline in 2016, we revised in 2018. India further revised in 2020. They are flexible enough to revise these guidelines so that the trades can smoothly happen. So the idea of today's discussion is that how do we foresee the electricity market structure in South Asia, which will A, optimize the use of resources, B, will have a solid answer, a good answer to the climate change concerns, C, also economize the power supply. If power can be available at a cheaper rate anywhere and it is surplus, can it be purchased elsewhere, this country or that country? Will the same country also import and export? Now also it is happening. So all these things, but it will also depend on how different countries configure their own power structure, power supply structure, because their baselines are different. All the countries in the region I have seen in the last 20 years have done changes in their policies, in their legislations, because everywhere this uneasiness of power supply, shortages, energy efficiency have been on the agenda, and therefore each country has done, some country has done a little more, some country has more challenges, some country has less, but each country has done. So there is a baseline today. Each country has a regulatory commission today. There is a baseline today. Like in India, we have separated power grid from power grid, the POSOCO. Now it is India grid, which controls the grid management. Recently, we separated the central transmission utility, which will do the planning for transmission for the whole country. So these have been evolving. Indian market structure itself has been evolving, and in last 25 years, and particularly in last 20 years, it has undergone severe changes. And therefore, market structure, competition itself, today we have 50% power supply capacity by the private sector. Just at the beginning of this century, we had just 10%. So that brings a different dimension of competition. Finally, the objective is that consumers should have a choice. We don't have a choice yet in case of consumers today. Will they have a choice in coming years? That is also that idea of market structure. And this competition, private sector, public sector, put together provides better service, better facility, better pricing. Those are the ideas. So will that be extrapolated? Extrapolation would be a simplified word, but to give a sense at the regional level. And in that, would there be a feeling of accommodation? I remember when we did in India, different regions will have different feelings, different states will have different perceptions, different ideas and differences. But then we ironed out those differences. Though we are same country, but we had challenges and problems to come to consensus, and consensus for a larger good and larger interest. I think that is the context of today's discussion. I think we have very eminent panel. I think 10 to 12 minutes, each one of them will give their view on futuristic, future vision, and vision not of the destination. Quite often we mix the destination with path. The destination can be very ideal, but destination may be 10, 15 years ago in the future. But then we also have to charter a path. What do we do in next 5 years? What do we do in next 10 years? How do we vision its next 15 years or so? I think that's the context with which we thought this discussion should be structured. And rest, I now request the first speaker. I think we have Simanji. It's very, very comprehensive, and you have already laid the pathways based on what we have done and we are going to do. And of course, retail competition will be the ultimate objective everywhere. That is a little away in India. That will be a little more away in other countries. But then India has won, and it has lessons. It has lessons of the past. So with that, I won't take time now. We will request Mr. Azad. Mr. Azad, he responded when I spoke to him. He was so spontaneous, and he was the power secretary at a very, very crucial stage, and subsequently occupied very senior positions in the government. Now he is the president of the Bangladesh Energy Society. Thank you, Mr. Azad. Very comprehensive presentation. More discussions. I can assure you we will have more discussions. Whether we will have multilateral, bilateral, trilateral, definitely these discussions will help. So many things have happened. In 10 years, 12 years, so many things have happened. I'm sure, I'm optimist. More discussions and sharing of experiences will enable us. With that, can I request questions, not long comments, to ask of any of the distinguished speakers? I must say that all of them have contributed immensely, both from India as well as abroad. All of them have been positive, that in the context of what is happening on energy transition, this cooperation is a must. There have been successes. We have done reasonably well. It is not that it's not happening. It's already happening. And it is evolving, just as it evolved in India also. As I said in one of my comments, that quite often we get victim of not being able to intelligently distinguish between the destination and the path. Sometimes you say that destination itself is the beginning, and then we don't get anywhere. So therefore, destination and pathways must be charted. It shouldn't happen that destination should frighten us not to move one first step. And that is how it has moved. I mean, as Mandal said, that 13 to 14% annual growth in the trading that has happened across border. So I think things have been happening. What is not happening today is on account of lack of sufficient transmission infrastructure. Like if sufficient transmission infrastructure was there, as Mr. Azad said in the beginning, then right now more power could have gone to, or sometimes could have come in also from Bangladesh. So that's the problem. So positive comment. Mandal, is there any question? He compliments you for making the comment, and he answers that why it could not happen, because softer options of lending came up. Because I was, in fact, this is one item which was pursuing for 4 or 5 years. Of course, but truth of the matter also is, just as in case of India itself, power grid itself was opposed to private sector entry into the transmission. So this happens. Power grid was not very much favorably disposed. That and the slogan was being made at the time that transmission is the natural monopoly. It has been demonstrated by opening up transmission to private sector, not privatization. Opening up, it has optimized the cost. I think part of the story also happens that way, that you don't get support from your existing outfits. They have to give all the data. They have to choose a right transmission line, which can be done. Like existing operators, normally what they do is they will choose most difficult line, and then it will be unworkable. But I think, as rightly stated by Mr. Azad, he agrees with the idea that it should, if we have to expand transmission system, it has to. So in-country transmission also has to expand, and this cross-border transmission also has to expand. And somewhere we were trying both 765 kV, which Mr. Azad rightly mentioned, that is being discussed. And then we were trying one more HVDC that got dropped. I think the story could have been somewhat different in today's crisis of Bangladesh if we had a little more transmission connectivity. We have, Adanis have done, but Adanis have done for the dedicated power station. It's not as a part of the overall grid structure yet. So that's there. I might tell you, because I have been dealing with this, as most of you know. One is a general approach. This is the first comment I will make is that is fine, that can be done. But so far as the specific is concerned, at this point of time, one 765 kV transmission interconnection between India via Bangladesh to India, financing is not issue at all. It was an issue for a couple of years. It got clarified. Power Grid is prepared to fund this transmission line completely. And whatever transmission services Bangladesh will avail of, they will pay by way of transmission charges. So that is there. Similarly, I think there could be people both in private sector and public sector to do the transmission system between Sri Lanka and India, provided it goes to some basic things that yes, there are some projects that are also happening here, and some people are prepared to say, okay, we will. So I think creating a JV model is also okay. Nepal, India has signed a joint venture agreement. Power Grid and NEA has signed a joint venture agreement. I think we will have to see multiple options. And option that you are suggesting is also one of the options, whether a joint company can be created to develop transmission infrastructure. But some of the specifics I mentioned to you today, there could be regions which have to be pursued and resolved. But transmission, as rightly stated by many of the speakers, adequacy of transmission infrastructure is a must. 765 was synchronous. Bhutan, we have synchronous. Nepal, we have synchronous. Okay. Bangladesh, only we have HVDC, and one is radial mode in Tripura area. 765 kV, this system, which has, and that would have perhaps the capacity of almost 6,000 to 7,000 megawatt, in which a TOF will be given to Bangladesh for the power that they draw. Just such a nice thing. I think I and Mr. Azad will have to do some work in Bangladesh system to activate this. Initially, I must tell you to share with you, there was a resistance on the part of India, Power Grid itself, that they should also fund this. And Bangladesh rightly said, why should we fund if our need is very limited? And now the position for the last 2-3 years has been that Power Grid does not insist on funding, financing of the thing. They will do whatever transmission part, a TOF, they will use. Let's say for 1,000 megawatt or 500 megawatt, they will pay the transmission charges. So we have to pursue that matter. We have to pursue. Same was the case with HPTC. Siemens was prepared to fund that. ADB was prepared to fund that project. Another 5,000 megawatt HPTC in North. There also, I think there was some. So see, sometimes many people who are in a position to take a view, they become a little tough. We used to face this problem within India. On transmission, there would be states which we used to be tough. And we could prove to them that their toughness has gone against them when they did not get enough power. I won't name these states. The same situation, and partly in any country that can happen. And we have to struggle. These are things where we have to struggle. I think I should mention to you. There are point was made about regulators.
Yes.
Good thing is that there is a South Asia Forum of Infrastructure Regulator, SAFIR, whose secretariat is in CRC office, and chairmanship rotates. Like at this point of time, perhaps Bhutan is the chairman or something like that. Then sometime back, India was the chairman. No, Bangladesh was the chairman. Now, they made a decision in one of their meetings to create a joint working group of SAFIR, not regulator SAFIR. And that joint working group is working on two things, not harmonization, the alignment of regulations. So they have taken grid code, and on grid code, almost 95-98% of job has already been done. Grid code, and the other one is say market design. A market design is not a static matter, as most of you have seen. It has moved from one point to another point, even in India. I think regulators are very much part of this process in a different way, not official way of or diplomatic way, but through this South Asia Forum of Infrastructure Regulator, setting up a joint working group. And that joint working group, as I can understand, have already done 6-7 meetings. So something is happening. Something is happening.
Yeah.
This discussion, we wanted to educate ourselves on how do we see the future. You see, in the past, we have dealt with this subject for many, many years. Mr. Azad has been part of that process, at least when he was the Energy Secretary in 2009. Never there was a better time than today because of the urgent need of renewable getting expanded. And today, India also is feeling, and rightly it should feel, the need for this cooperation more than it ever felt. Because India needs hydropower of Bhutan and Nepal, definitely, if they have to succeed on the hydropower, on the solar expansion that is happening. There can be other options also. So therefore, all sides should feel the need. So I think India is rightly feeling that need, and this is being reflected very well. They are also, I mean, at the secretary level, many of you may be knowing that at the secretary level there is joint steering committee that is official, and at the secretary level we have this World Bank supported Power Secretary Roundtable. 16th meeting of Power Secretary Roundtable is going to happen in the first week of August. I think these things are being discussed. So future is bright. I thought that it's good to have views, and then we will try to summarize some of these discussions. At the same time, some of the influential people like Mr. Azad and also IPAN has been very effective in. I was not so sure, but in Nepal, 50% of power generation is by private sector. Out of what they have done, 2,500 and all that. I mean, almost almost 40 to 45 to 50% is the private sector. So private sector generation is a success story in Bangladesh, also in Nepal, and of course now also in our case it is 50% is. I may tell you that Rohit may be thinking that I inspired you to ask that question. In my interactions in a different context, I have been also feeling whether our institutions, whether trading companies and whether these exchanges, whether this exchange or that exchange, are they doing enough to sort of discuss, disseminate with our neighboring countries? Many of, see, this issue, Mr. Azad knows it very well. This issue is also an issue of building confidence, level of trust, and bona fide of what we are saying. Each discussion in Bangladesh, I was always saying that the problem that Bangladesh may be thinking today vis-a-vis India, in India itself, we had bigger problems within our own country with one state and the other state and the center. So that sometimes that sort of level of understanding and confidence has to come. And that can come only through proper and more extensive dissemination. So I think this is a good feedback to exchange in India Energy Exchange. He's not an ordinary person. Rinjin is the man, the managing director of Group Green. And he constitutes what happens in the power generation at that place. I mean, at a very senior level. If he thinks that enough has not been and he has to depend on so many consultants, why should he depend on so many consultants when some advice can be given and a proper advice can be given? Not in favor of India, but in favor of overall system. That will be great. Rohit, it is Nepal, Bhutan, and Bangladesh. Bangladesh, you could definitely have a word with Mr. Azad. Azad Saab, so much of crisis there, and you've also highlighted that you solved the crisis in 2010-11, and now again crisis. And Bangladesh is the one which is not, Bangladesh was the first to be asking for exchange, but they have not taken advantage of exchange so far. I tell you, you are right. See, never before it had happened. I also was there and I have been visiting, not very regularly, but visiting Nepal. You see, in the last 10 years, couple of things have happened. 10 years back, there was a general sort of reservation on a large section of society. Why should Nepal hydropower be developed to give power to India? We had to do a few seminars, give the case study of Bhutan, also requested some of the Bhutan experts to, or non-experts or NGOs to talk to them. Today, there is an overwhelming consensus that Nepal must develop hydro projects, not only for enhancing consumption within Nepal, but also earn revenue, export to India, export to Bangladesh. So on that, there is absolutely, I never saw such a great support in the last 4 or 5 years that has happened there. And that has resulted in some of your companies here. SJVNL went with one project, Arun 3. They have got Lower Arun, and they have got one more project, Arun 4. The NHPC has been given a project, and perhaps one more project is being given. One more transmission line from Arun 3 is being developed between India and Nepal. So I think these are largest capacity. Upper Karnali is also almost 900 to 1000 megawatt. SJVNL Arun 3 also about 1000 megawatt. Nepal has done 2600 megawatt capacity. But do you know the number? The number of projects may be 100. So chota, small projects they've done in the past. So I think at this point of time, there is a bit greater understanding and greater support for. They're also spending a lot of money on transmission infrastructure. I think situation is right. These are good news for, this is good news for Nepal and good news for Bhutan. But according to me, as a professional, I would say this is a better news for India because India's solar ambition will be greatly facilitated by dependence through dependence on these two countries for hydro project and also a storage project. There is another good news that never again before, I mean, Rinjin may either contradict or supplement, that there is an understanding even in Bhutan for a storage project. Because some of the projects they have offered for India, government to government also, is a storage project. So a storage project will be greatly helpful for our backing up of solar system. The storage hydro project. So I think we are good for energy sector, energy transition. Good things are happening. Whether we are fully exploiting this potential, but I must say that there is keenness everywhere. Keenness is all around. Yeah. No, I boldly mentioned in the last conference about a week, 10 days back, that, power is needed in India, but not at any cost.
Yeah, that's right.
And I mentioned that there are capacities in the country which are created, but that capacity remains idle. Because if the cost is high, people don't buy. Because we are also disseminating this knowledge and this expertise or this input with our distribution companies to buy power, because they are today obligated under the law, under the policy, that they must buy on the minimum price basis.
Yeah.
So if that being the case, and in that case, I must say great thank you to Mr. Rinjin that he has appreciated the idea of backloading of tariff, which is helpful. So that means if you do backloading of tariff little bit and then move ahead, you are able to have a little lower tariff and then little higher tariff later, lower tariff in the beginning. So that happens, that project becomes viable. Financial institutions must recognize it. That is important. All right, then I think that